Hi guys, and today we're going to be focusing on practice structures for the GCSE PE paper 2, and in particular we need to be focusing on mass practice, distributed practice, fixed and varied practice. Now you've got to be careful in this one because it's quite often the 9-mark exam question where they'll probably pick two to be compared against, so like mass versus distributed practice or fixed versus varied. And often when we're looking at the advantages versus disadvantages and what type of players are best suited for which type of practice. So mass practice is one area that tends to be asked a fair bit. So there's a lot of information on this area. So it's just definitely worthwhile a bit of revision on this. So the first thing you need to be able to do is define what mass practice is. And in this case, it would be an AO1 point where you're given the facts and definitions. So repeated practice of a skill over a period of time without a break. So there are no rest periods when you're doing mass practice. It's just one skill after another, after another, after another. Now it's always best for closed skills and basic skills, so brush up on your skill classification knowledge, but where there's limited impact of the environment. An example, the example I'd give is things like the forehand volley, which is just repeated forehand volleys in tennis. But it could be things like running and cycling as well, where you're just doing the same thing over and over again. Now, because there are no rest periods, it is best suited for experienced performers rather than beginners. And the reasoning behind this is that there is likely to be an element of fatiguing involved with it. So beginners tend to have less fitness levels, so will get tired more quickly. Beginners will find it a little bit more boring to do the same thing over and over again, whereas an advanced player will have higher motivation levels, so should be able to cope with this. And once the fatigue and the boredom kicks in, the quality of performance will drop. Now, because it's mass practice and there's no rest points, there aren't any periods where the coach can give feedback. So that's another reason why the quality of the performance will drop. However, there are some benefits of this. So one, it does spend a fair bit of time focusing on a particular skill, and that skill can then be grooved, okay, so or like get a feeling of the skill so it can be repeated over and over again. And that means that one skill is developed quite quickly in this method. It's really good for experienced performers because they have their good level of fitness, which means in turn they can reinforce the skill when they're under fatigue. So if you're taking it from a practice situation to a game situation where they may be fatigued, that skill has been reinforced and can be reproduced under those conditions. Elite performers have higher levels of motivation, or have higher levels of motivation, so they can cope with the repetition of doing the same thing over and over again. And then, and because they really know the skill, what they're really doing is they're reinforcing that skill in muscle memory and making it a more consistent action. So if we take distributed practice, it's essentially opposite to the mass practice. And this is where there are breaks in practice. So you repeat the skill, but this time you have recovery periods. So there are breaks in the practice. So it could be things like 800-meter repeats where you might do a block of 800 meters and then you rest and you do it again. It could be a gymnastics vault where you would do your vault, then you come and recover and get feedback from the coach and then do the vault again. Or it could be a session where you're splitting it into different blocks. So you might spend some time serving, followed by a period of time where you might do some volleys, and then you might work on some rallies. So it's just how the session could be broken up in between rest periods. Works really well with open and complex skills. It's good because you can drill match-related skills, which are more open-based and adapt to different situations because you have the time between your skills for feedback, and then you can review your learning in the breaks. This skill is better for beginners, or this type of practice is better for beginners, the opposite way around to mass practice because there are rest periods, so there's less chance of fatigue. You can really improve the safety of a skill, so particularly if it's a highly dangerous skill, distributed practice will be better suited, so that break allows for the review and recovery. You can change the activities in between breaks. which then can reduce tedium and allow for more motivation, so they're less boring on the skills. Other aspects is that in the breaks you can gain more mental rehearsal time, but the concerning point in this area is that it may not give you enough time to fully learn the skill. So the disadvantage is that you're not focusing on one skill for long enough to really drill that skill home. So these two areas go hand in hand, the maths practice and distributed practice, and you tend to get the comparison of the two in an exam question. Fixed practice is where you repeat the whole skill over and over again. You can have breaks in this, but it's the same skill in the same way, and it's sometimes called drilling or grooving the skill. So it might be a performer using a bowling machine in cricket, for example, and just having the bowling just keep coming at them, and they take different bats, they keep batting, practicing maybe a cover drive. It could be a tennis ball feeder just launching the ball at you, and then you're just practicing the volley. It might be particular set plays like line out routines and corner routines, like short corner routines or corners in football, and those sort of set plays where you're just repeating the same thing over and over again to really drill and groove that skill and reinforce it in your long-term memory. So works really well with closed skills where it's just the same movement pattern over and over again. It's where you might get set a particular practice and you just work on that particular practice over and over again. Now, the coach would set the conditions and expect a conditioned response, and in A-level PE this is called a stimulus response bond, SR bond. So you have the stimulus and then you have the set response, and that becomes bonded and becomes more of a natural movement in your memories. So it reinforces the skill. This in turn will improve the safety of that skill, particularly so it's really good for skills that are dangerous, where you have to keep practicing the same thing over and over again to reduce the risk of it. But like I said earlier, very good for set plays. There are elements of negativity where it can become boring and it can increase the fatigue. If you're just doing the same thing over and over again, it can make you more tired. And then finally we get to varied practice, where it's the same skill in different situations or environments. So it could be like, for example, passing from a defensive position and passing in an attacking position. So it's the same skill of passing, but you're just adapting it to different circumstances. It could be shooting from different angles. So it could be a netball player shooting from different positions around in the D. So often used in open skills where the situation can change in irregular times. This helps the performer adapt to the game scenario that they're in, and they can learn how to change the skills within the game conditioned performances. So the idea is that they're able to copy and replicate the movements they're learning in training into matches. The two main disadvantages of these areas is that it's time consuming to set up a drill and then run through it and then change the situation and then run through it again, so it can take time. But it is more interesting, so you reduce the boredom because you're changing your positioning and environments. But there can be elements of negative transfer. Now, negative transfer is where one skill has a negative impact on another skill. So you might end up learning a skill which has a detrimental effect on the skill that you're practicing. Now, this fixed and varied practice don't have as much regularity in the exam board questions, so less often a 9-mark exam question, more often just a shorter 4-mark or 3-mark question. So just bear that in mind when you're revising. Maths and distributed, it's good to learn it as a 9-marker because that comes up again and it'll help you with the lower mark questions. Whereas fixed and varied have less regularity in those exam questions, so really you want to know what they are and sort of examples of them. Anyway, I hope this helps and good luck in the exam very soon.